I never imagined my own driveway could become a battlefield. But then she showed up. Karen, the neighbor who thinks HOA rules are a personal weapon, and started tearing through my property on her ATV. Like it was her private shortcut. Every tire track felt like a challenge, every roar of that engine a declaration that she could do whatever she wanted. My frustration burned, but so did something else. A quiet, simmering plan for revenge. How far would I go to reclaim my land, my peace, my dignity? And more importantly, what would it take to make her finally pay for turning my home into her playground? Life in our quiet little cul-de-sac felt perfect. Or at least, it did. Our family had moved here chasing peace, wide, open spaces, and the kind of neighborly smiles you see in movies, not the tense, polite nods of a typical suburban street. On weekends, the kids would run barefoot across the grass, chasing the sunlight as it danced through the tall pines lining our property. My mornings were simple, ritualistic. Coffee on the porch, breathing in the scent of fresh cut grass, waving to neighbors as they walked their dogs. This was home. Safe. Ordinary. We loved our driveway. Too. Long, private, framed by flowering shrubs, and a modest fence we'd spent weekends planting. It wasn't just concrete, it was part of our daily rhythm. Each car parked there carried a little story, trips to school, groceries, visitors, and laughter echoing through our yard. It symbolized stability, ownership, the small comforts that make a house a home. And yet, beneath that calm, there were cracks we barely noticed at first. Our community had rules. Of course, not unusual, but some neighbors treated them as weapons rather than guidelines. At the monthly HOA meetings, discussions that should have been mundane often devolved into personal attacks, passive-aggressive complaints, and bureaucratic gymnastics. Most of the time, we nodded politely, staying out of it, believing we had nothing to fear as long as we followed the rules. But there was one neighbor who seemed different. Always watching, always judging. Karen. She had an eye for anything out of place, and a conviction that the neighborhood existed solely to obey her vision. She didn't just follow rules, she enforced them. Personally. And though she smiled at us during casual encounters, there was something in her glance, a flicker of entitlement, that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't until the first tire tracks appeared on our driveway that I realized just how far she was willing to go. At first, it seemed harmless. ATVs had occasionally rolled down the street, a sound we barely noticed. But then it became clear. She wasn't just passing through. She was taking liberties, treating our property like a public shortcut, daring us to challenge her. And I had a feeling that once she started, there would be no stopping her. Little did I know, this wasn't just a petty neighbor complaint. It was the beginning of a conflict that would test patience, ingenuity, and the limits of HOA power in ways I could never have imagined. At first, I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that one neighbor's ATV antics couldn't possibly spiral into a full-blown nightmare. I thought if I kept calm and followed the rules meticulously, everything would eventually settle. But Karen had other plans. The very next week, I noticed fresh tracks across the driveway. This time deeper, wider, more deliberate. It wasn't casual anymore, it was brazen, a statement. My anger simmered beneath the surface, but I held back, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of a confrontation. Then came the first notice from the HOA. I remember opening the envelope, like it was a letter from an enemy in a spy movie. It has come to the board's attention that there are unauthorized alterations to your property. My heart sank. Alterations. I had planted new shrubs along the driveway edge, carefully following the guidelines the HOA had sent us last year. Apparently, Karen had reported them as a violation of aesthetic conformity. I stared at the letter, disbelief and frustration colliding. Was this really how my peaceful life had transformed into a bureaucratic battlefield? The next few days were surreal. I attended the HOA meeting, thinking I could calmly explain the situation. Instead, I walked into a war zone. The board, almost all of them nodding at Karen's side, grilled me over the placement of plants, the length of the driveway, even the angle of my mailbox. Every answer I gave was met with suspicion or dismissal. I felt a knot tightening in my chest as I realized this wasn't just petty criticism. It was a systematic effort to assert control over every inch of my property. Karen, of course, was radiant in her self-righteousness. She smiled at me, a slow, calculating smile, as if she were daring me to protest. I wanted to scream, but instead I took notes, counted the number of complaints, the rules cited, and the fines threatened. It was a dizzying, Kafkaesque experience. Each minor violation seemed to open the door to two more, each more absurd than the last. The HOA claimed I was in violation for the placement of my flower pots being inconsistent with community aesthetic standards. A tree branch, slightly overhanging into a neighbor's property line. The unauthorized driveway pattern, which had existed for years without complaint. And then came the fines. Hundreds of dollars at a time, piling up like bricks on my chest. The stress was relentless. I spent nights poring over HOA bylaws, rereading every clause, looking for loopholes or errors. I emailed, called, and attempted to reason, but each communication seemed to trigger a new complaint. Karen, apparently bored with the subtle intimidation of tire tracks and reports, had escalated. She began driving her ATV past my house multiple times a day, eyes on me like a hawk, seemingly timing her passes to when I was outside. Every rev of the engine was a taunt, a reminder that my home, my sanctuary, was now her stage. Then came the legal letters. My mailbox started filling with formal threats, notices of liens, intent to sue, and requests for compliance within absurdly short timeframes. I hired a lawyer, thinking that bringing a professional into the mix would finally settle things. Instead, the HOA dug in their heels. The lawyer confirmed my fears. Their rules were written vaguely on purpose, giving them maximum flexibility to harass residents. Any defense I mounted seemed to vanish against the weight of their bureaucratic machinery. The tension reached a new level when Karen decided to involve neighbors directly. Flyers appeared under doors, claiming that I was illegally modifying my property. Threat to community standards. People I had waved to and exchanged pleasantries with for years now gave me wary looks. Some crossed the street to avoid me. The isolation, intentional or not, cut deeper than the fines. It wasn't just my driveway anymore. It was my reputation, my peace, and my sense of belonging being chipped away, inch by inch. Every morning felt like a gauntlet. I woke to the distant roar of ATVs, my mailbox filled with threats, and neighbors whispering as I walked past. I tried to find allies in the HOA, people who might see reason. Some sympathized quietly, but no one was willing to speak out, fearful of Karen's wrath or the board's retaliation. It was as if the community itself had become a trap, one that I couldn't escape without confrontation. The real tipping point came one afternoon when I returned home to find tire tracks cutting a perfect path across the shrubs I had planted just weeks earlier. Flowers crushed, soil upturned, the driveway marred with a pattern of destruction that was deliberate and personal. Karen's ATV had left a signature on my land, a visual taunt that shouted, "I own this space now." I wanted to confront her, to scream, but I knew that any direct action could be twisted against me by the HOA. The fear of escalating the conflict legally clashed with my instinct to fight back physically. I was trapped in a perfect storm of harassment, rules, fines, and intimidation. It was at this point I realized something crucial. The battle wasn't just about my driveway. It was about asserting autonomy over my property, reclaiming my sense of security, and confronting a system that allowed one individual to weaponize authority. I started documenting everything. Photographs, timestamps, videos of ATV passes, copies of all communications with the HOA. I learned the rules backward and forward, noting inconsistencies, loopholes, and errors I could exploit. Despite the escalating stress, a part of me felt a flicker of resolve. Karen might think she was untouchable, but every action left evidence. Every overreach, every petty violation, every revving engine on my driveway was a mistake she didn't realize she was making. I began to see the contours of a plan. Not yet for retaliation, but for strategy. I wouldn't respond emotionally, I would respond methodically. I would turn her overconfidence against her. And yet, as the sun set that evening and I stared at the ATV tracks cutting across my property, I couldn't shake a creeping anxiety. Karen was relentless, the HOA was complicit, and the system was set up against me. The question that haunted me as darkness fell over the cul-de-sac was simple but terrifying. How far would this go? And what would it take to stop her before the situation spiraled completely out of control? Weeks of frustration had finally built into a pressure I could no longer contain. Each morning, the sound of Karen's ATV roaring down my driveway felt like a personal attack, a declaration that she owned the space I had built with my own hands. Every fine, every letter, every whispered judgment from neighbors had chipped away at my patience. But it wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about justice. About reclaiming the dignity of my home. I knew that the moment of reckoning was coming. I just didn't yet know how intense it would be. The day it all erupted began like any other, deceptively ordinary. I stepped outside to inspect the driveway, noting the fresh tire tracks etched into the soil. Karen's ATV had been relentless, weaving between my flower beds, leaving destruction in its wake. But this time, I noticed something different. She had parked at the edge of my property, casually lingering, as if daring me to challenge her. Her smile was smug, infuriating. I clenched my fists, my blood boiling, and made a decision today. The power dynamic would change. I had spent nights meticulously documenting every violation, every fine, and every transgression. Photographs, timestamps, emails, and video recordings formed a clear timeline. The HOA's rules, vague and malleable, had been weaponized against me. But now they were my ammunition. I called my lawyer one last time, laying out the entire sequence: the unauthorized ATV passes, the false violation notices, the malicious fines, and Karen's deliberate intimidation. My lawyer, initially skeptical of the emotional toll, finally leaned forward, eyes sharp. "We have a case, but timing and presentation are everything. You need to hit hard, and you need witnesses." That afternoon, the HOA held their monthly meeting in the community center. It was the perfect stage. Karen, predictably, was present, radiating confidence, her expression a mixture of smug satisfaction and entitlement. Board members nodded along as she detailed concerns about my property, portraying herself as a vigilant guardian of community standards. I entered quietly, carrying a binder thick with evidence, each page a testament to months of harassment and injustice. My heart pounded, a mixture of fear and resolve, but I knew I could no longer remain silent. When it was my turn to speak, the room fell into a tense hush. I opened my binder, Flipping to the first set of photographs, pristine flower beds from 2 months ago, now flattened by repeated ATV passes. Each image elicited murmurs from the audience. I recounted the sequence of fines, showing timestamps and official correspondence, emphasizing the inconsistencies in the HOA's enforcement. Every accusation Karen had made unraveled before the gathered neighbors and board members, leaving a trail of absurdity in its wake. Karen's expression faltered slightly, her confident smile slipping. I pressed on, showing video footage of her ATV barreling down my driveway, clearly ignoring signage and property boundaries. I paused on a clip where she deliberately aimed for a patch of shrubs I had just replanted, laughing as the plants were crushed beneath the wheels. The room was silent. The weight of evidence was undeniable. Then came the coup de grace, a clause buried deep in the HOA's own bylaws, one overlooked by every board member, explicitly protecting homeowners' right to maintain access and use of their private driveways. I read it aloud, slow and deliberate, letting the words sink in. No member of the HOA or resident may impede or restrict lawful access to another member's property without written authorization from the homeowner. I let the room absorb the statement. Karen's eyes widened, her hands trembling slightly as she realized the power she had wielded was entirely illegal. The board chairman cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. Murmurs rippled through the room as he stammered through a weak attempt to defend their position, citing precedent and tradition. I countered each point methodically, referencing the documentation in my binder. My voice, once tight with frustration, now carried authority. Each statement I made was a hammer strike against the narrative Karen had constructed. Karen, sensing the tide had turned, attempted to interrupt, to reclaim control with the same arrogance she had wielded in emails and letters. But the room no longer obeyed her. I held up the video evidence again, letting the footage speak louder than any words she could muster. She faltered, unable to defend herself against the undeniable truth of her actions, and for the first time, the facade of authority crumbled. Then, as if to punctuate her downfall, a neighbor I had quietly spoken to weeks before rose from the back of the room. They confirmed my account, attesting to the repeated ATV disturbances they had witnessed, corroborating the pattern of harassment. Another resident, emboldened by the mounting evidence, added details of Karen's prior complaints against other neighbors, painting a picture of a repeated abuse of power. The room shifted, the energy tangible, a collective recognition of injustice turning against the instigator. I leaned back slightly, letting the moment breathe. Months of tension, anxiety, and meticulous preparation had culminated in this public unraveling. Karen, once a looming threat over my property and peace of mind, now appeared small, exposed, and cornered. The board members, their authority questioned, began discussing restitution, reversing fines, and issuing formal warnings. It was more than vindication. It was a public acknowledgement that the system could not be manipulated by one individual's ego. But the climax was not just legal or procedural. It was deeply personal. I had confronted fear and frustration with preparation, patience, and resolve. I had taken control of my narrative, transforming helplessness into empowerment. The room, charged with tension and relief, bore witness to a reversal that felt almost cinematic. Karen, once untouchable, reduced to a figure of embarrassment and disbelief, while I stood resolute, my home and dignity restored in principle, if not yet fully in peace. As I left the meeting, I glanced back at Karen. Her glare met mine, a mixture of fury and recognition. She knew this was not over entirely. Some battles linger, but the most crucial confrontation had been won. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift, replaced with a sharp, electric sense of triumph. The driveway, my flowers, my home, my sanctuary, was mine again, and yet, as I drove back to my house, the evening sun casting long shadows across the cul-de-sac, a thought lingered in the back of my mind. Chilling and unshakable, she had lost this battle, yes, but would she stop here? Or was the real war just beginning? After the meeting, the atmosphere in our neighborhood began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first, like the subtle change of wind before a storm finally passes. Karen, stripped of her aura of untouchable authority, retreated from her daily patrols of my driveway. The board, previously hesitant to confront her overreach, started to enforce rules more fairly, at least outwardly, aware that the scrutiny had shifted toward them as well. I watched from the porch as neighbors exchanged cautious glances, some offering small nods or smiles of acknowledgement. There was a sense that the scales had been recalibrated, even if quietly. In the weeks following, I focused on reclaiming the physical space of my property, repairing the damage that had been inflicted during Karen's reign of intimidation. My flower beds were replanted, soil turned and nourished, shrubs carefully pruned to their original shape. I installed subtle but effective signage reminding visitors, politely but firmly, that the driveway was private property. Each repair, each improvement, was more than cosmetic, it was a statement of ownership, of reclaiming control over a space that had been under siege. I discovered a profound satisfaction in the act of restoration. It was as if I were not only rebuilding my yard, but also my sense of agency and confidence. The HOA itself underwent changes too. The board, previously complicit in unchecked enforcement, faced pressure from other residents who had witnessed the conflict unfold. Several long-time members stepped down quietly, their reluctance to address overreach finally exposed. New members joined with a promise of transparency and fairness, committing to establish clearer guidelines for property use, reporting, and conflict resolution. It was a slow process, but the shift toward accountability began to solidify. The very system that had been exploited to harass me was now being reshaped by the consequences of the confrontation. Karen, predictably, did not disappear entirely. She continued to participate in community functions, her presence still marked by subtle attempts to assert control. But the aura of authority she had wielded so arrogantly was gone. Her complaints were now met with skepticism, and any new grievances were meticulously documented by multiple witnesses before action was considered. The power dynamic had inverted. She had learned, perhaps painfully, that overreach carried consequences, and that the community would no longer tolerate unchecked intimidation. For my family, the emotional aftermath was equally significant. There were lingering moments of tension, the occasional glance at the driveway as if expecting a new provocation, but those moments gradually faded. The kids resumed their carefree play, laughter once again echoing freely through the yard. I found myself appreciating the small rituals I had once taken for granted. Morning coffee on the porch, quiet evenings tending the garden, watching the sunset over the pines. What had been threatened, almost lost, now felt more precious. The driveway was not just a path for cars. It was a symbol of resilience, a tangible reminder that boundaries, once challenged, could be defended. The conflict had also sparked reflection on the nature of community and neighborly relationships. I realized how easily civility can fracture when power is misused, and how crucial it is to document, communicate, and stand firm when one's rights are threatened. I began sharing my experience, quietly at first, with neighbors who expressed frustration over minor disputes, advising them on documentation and escalation strategies. My story became a cautionary tale, a blueprint for navigating the intricate web of HOA politics without losing one's footing. Legal resolution came in parallel with the personal one. The HOA officially rescinded all fines levied during Karen's campaign of harassment, and a formal warning was issued to her regarding misuse of reporting privileges. My lawyer helped draft a document outlining homeowners' rights within the community, citing my case as a precedent for fair treatment under the existing rules. While this did not erase the stress and anxiety endured during the months of conflict, it provided a concrete safeguard for the future and a measure of accountability for those who might attempt similar tactics. The broader community impact was subtle but undeniable. Conversations at HOA meetings became more measured, more structured, with clear agendas and protocols for raising concerns. The fear-based culture that Karen had helped cultivate was replaced, gradually, by a culture of transparency and documentation. Neighbors began to support one another more actively, offering corroboration when disputes arose, and ensuring that any claims of violations were properly verified before escalating. A sense of collective responsibility emerged, born from witnessing the chaos of unchecked power and the consequences that followed. Yet, even as order returned, the memory of the conflict lingered, a quiet reminder of how quickly ordinary life can be disrupted when personal ambition and unchecked authority collide. I often found myself reflecting on those weeks and months, the roller coaster of emotions, the sleepless nights spent strategizing, the moments of fear and rage. It became clear that the true victory was not merely the reversal of fines or the restoration of my driveway. It was the reclamation of agency, the knowledge that persistence, preparation, and courage could overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. There were lessons learned on multiple levels. Personally, I had discovered the value of meticulous documentation and strategic patience in the face of harassment. I had learned that anger alone was insufficient. It needed to be channeled into focused action. Emotionally, I gained resilience, an awareness that fear could be transformed into determination. On a communal level, the HOA learned that overreach carries consequences, and that transparency, fairness, and accountability are essential to maintaining trust within a neighborhood. In time, life returned to a rhythm that felt close to normal, though forever altered by the ordeal. I walked the driveway with a sense of pride, aware of the months of struggle that had culminated in this reclaimed space. My garden flourished, my family thrived, and neighbors, once wary, now offered smiles that felt genuine, tinged with admiration for having witnessed the confrontation. The house, once a stage for intimidation, had become a sanctuary again, not just physically, but psychologically, emotionally, and socially. As I reflect on the experience, I realize the story extends beyond a single neighbor or a single driveway. It is a narrative about boundaries, justice, and the courage to confront abuse, even when the system seems stacked against you. It demonstrates that preparation, documentation, and unwavering resolve can tip the scales of power, even in situations that appear hopeless. And perhaps most importantly, it underscores a simple truth: one person, armed with clarity and determination, can challenge abuse and effect change. The final takeaway is clear, and it resonates beyond my personal experience. Communities are shaped not only by rules, but by the integrity and courage of those who inhabit them. In standing up to Karen, I learned that asserting one's rights need not be combative or reckless. It can be strategic, measured, and ultimately transformative. My driveway, once violated, now stands as a testament to resilience and resolve. Every flower replanted, every tire track replaced with care, represents the reclamation of dignity, authority, and peace. And as I look out over the yard, the evening sun casting golden light across the property I fought so hard to protect, one question lingers quietly, almost rhetorically. How many more conflicts could have been avoided if people had simply respected boundaries? And how many could still be prevented if courage and preparation meet abuse head on? The answer, I now understand, lies not in fear or avoidance, but in the unwavering commitment to defend what is rightfully yours.